I actually have a confession to make. This is the first time I'm in Helsinki, and I've come from Dubai. And I thought it'd be a good idea to ask someone else who lives in Dubai, who's never been to Helsinki, to tell me what the weather is going to be like in Helsinki. So when they tell me the weather is going to be cold, the meaning of cold is different to the feeling of gold. So I've now caught a cold, and that's the souvenir I'm going to take back to Dubai, to that guy. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a lovely place. So today, I actually want to share with you a story that began 5 years ago in Dubai. The story has actually inspired many people to live a different type of lifestyle. And it's a story that is actually shaping the real estate market in Dubai. And back then, in 2013, when I worked on this project, which was called the Sustainable City in Dubai, many people were had a different view of whether this project will ever be viable, whether it will ever be delivered. Because back then, I mean, this was after the financial crash. And you heard many stories about projects such as Masdar, which many believed it was a failed project. So a lot of that negative feeling was coming into this project too. So during that year, in the planning phase, we were going to trade shows and conferences, and many people would say, no, it's not economically viable to build such a city in Dubai. And the word sustainable and Dubai didn't really go hand in hand. So we had to prove these people wrong. But at the same time, this also gave me some worries. And I thought, maybe this just becomes a concept. And maybe this project does become another Masdar. Then in 2014, they started to build the actual city. Then I thought, okay, now my fear went another level, because now I'm thinking, will they build it and will it just become a ghost town? Will they build it and will it really become a sustainable city? Because you can build a city, but sustainability is really measured by the way people live in that city. Then 2016, the first families moved into the city. Then another fear came. Are these the right people? Do they actually have the mentality of sustainability? Are we going to be able to actually promote a culture of sustainable living? And can we actually make sure that this city can sustain itself for the future? Then in 2018, almost all the city became occupied. Now, 98% of the city is occupied. And I, myself, I'm a proud resident of the Sustainable City in Dubai. And today, I would like to share with you the success story of this project. So what is the Sustainable City in Dubai? It's a 46-hectare project, which features 500 townhouses. It has a mixed use of areas, such as educational. So there's a school for kindergarten all the way to year 12. There's also a mixed-use area that has all the amenity needs of the city. So we talk about supermarket, we talk about clinics, we talk about retail, food and beverage, laundrettes, hairdressers. So all the needs of the city are in one place. We also have an innovation center that's going to be the brains of the city. And it's really important for the city to become a living lab, which is what it is today. And I'll explain during the presentation why it's become a living lab and why it's important that when we're thinking of sustainable cities, we think of them as living spaces, as a living lab. So we actually took a very passive approach to the planning of the city to begin with, because that's where you're going to gain the most environmental needs. So all the orientation of all the buildings within the city are such that we reduce the energy demands of the cooling, because the cooling load, that's where in Dubai, almost 80% of the energy, that's what it's used for, to actually cool the buildings down. So we do that through orientation to minimize the direct solar gain, but also we increase the insulation of the buildings, and we use many active techniques such as using reflective UV paints and also using energy-efficient appliances. But here's the thing. Buildings don't use energy. It's the people who are using the energy, and we have to educate the people who are living there about sustainability. And actually, one thing that we do when people move into the city is we actually educate them about the concept of the sustainable city. And what we found when we first planned this city, that maybe education was going to be a big tool to this whole development, because through education, you can already reduce a huge amount of energy demand. But what we've learned is many people who are coming to live in the city, they come for that lifestyle. So rather than us having to create a very aggressive marketing technique, actually we're naturally having people who are coming here from different parts of the world. So there's a wide range of nationalities who actually live in the city. And one thing we really needed to do, besides just analyzing the data of how the buildings are performing, but also analyzing the social data. Who are the people living here and why are they coming here? And one of the key things that we found is that the safety aspect of the city, because it's a car-free city, so people can actually walk around or cycle or walk without even having to come across a car. And we also have these buggies, and the buggies have become a big success story of this project. So the whole city, you are only walking within several minutes to actually reach, whether it's a restaurant or whether it's a supermarket, we are talking minutes of walk. And in the extreme weather, in the extreme, let's say, heat, people can get there much quicker by using these electric buggies, which are shared amongst the whole community. So how does a car-free concept work? Because Dubai is a car city. So even though we have created this community, people are still having to travel to various parts of the city. So we have these solar farms where people park their cars, and once they park their cars in these solar farms, they can then either walk or cycle or use these electric buggies to go to their homes. We also have a concierge service, so when people have some shopping or they come late in the evening with the children, the concierge service actually collects them and collects their goods and takes them directly to their homes. So mobility has become a very key success story in this project, and it's also become a social aspect to the project. So even people at the age of 14 can even ride these buggies. So it's become something that residents are enjoying to use, and it's become almost like a social thing. So when I walk in the city and I meet someone who I know, we would actually stop and we would speak. And what we're doing now is also testing other methods of mobility. So we are also creating pilot projects. So we're working with the Road and Transport Authority in Dubai, which is called RTA, to test some of their future initiatives. So this is the autonomous vehicle. It's the first autonomous vehicle that we're testing in such neighborhood for the government. And we're collecting a lot of useful data to really understand how these vehicles are behaving in such environment, which is very different to an environment inside the city. So some of the things that we've learned, actually, we are at the very early stages in the evolution of these vehicles. So when the palm trees, when the actual leaves actually blow, the car stops. When a pigeon comes in front of the door, the actual walkways, the car also stops. But personally, something that I've learned from these vehicles is that they actually lose the social value that they add to the city. One thing that I love about the buggies is, as I say, I could actually stop and speak to someone. When you get inside the shuttle, it's really going from A to B without any social interaction. So this is some interesting observation that we've made about these, but I think they do have their place, and I think they do have their place when we talk about taking people from a long distance from A to B at a much quicker pace. The other thing we also look to do is to learn from the wisdom of our grandfathers. So we looked at using Bagherian towers to actually cool the spaces inside each cluster. So we have these wind towers that essentially use evaporative cooling technique, and they can actually reduce the air temperature between 10 to 15 degrees lower in the extreme heats in the summer. And it's important that we really do this, because during the summer it can be very hot, and we want to make sure that we are engaging people socially and actively. So next to each of these clusters and these towers, we have these playgrounds which actually are being used by the community. So every cluster has a different type of social space within them, and they can also be used when it's extreme weather, because the temperature is very different. One of the success stories of this project is also this green spine. And this green spine has become the social glue to this whole development. It's also an active and healthy green spine. So there are many types of events and activities that people can experience on this green spine, from jogging tracks to outdoor fitness stations, to playgrounds. And it's a productive green spine. So what that means is actually most of the trees that we have planted here are actually producing goods and foods for the city, which is actually shared amongst the residents. And it's important that we understand the value that productive landscapes has on the city. This is why we actually integrated urban farming within the entire green spine. And this is really bringing people together. And food, for many centuries, that has been bringing people together. It's become a social value to cities. And the other thing it's doing is becoming an educational value. So many of the families who actually move here, they tell us one of the reasons that they come here is because actually their children are actually learning more about sustainable living. And it's becoming an educational value to even the young generation and the future generation. So the urban farming for us, one thing that we've learned is definitely an important aspect when it comes to planning these future cities. So the landscape, I would say, is probably the key driver for this project. And I genuinely believe that a ground-up approach to city planning is what creates livable destinations. And we have to think about food securities and also future-proofing cities, because in the next 20 to 30 years, the population will be growing, and the city's infrastructures are already struggling to cope with the needs of their residents. So we have created what I would say is a resilient city, and we are actually learning a lot, and we are piloting many new projects. One of them is the aquaponics and vertical farming. So within these biodomes, one of them we have created what we call a seed program, which is an early learning sustainable education for young children to really understand more about agriculture, but also for us to learn about new techniques that we can actually use in the city to actually implement not only on this project, but future projects. We've also taken this to the next level. Can you grow strawberries in the desert? Yes, you can. So we worked with a company called Agricool to actually see if we can grow strawberries in a place where temperatures can reach up to 50 degrees. So they came up with this cabin that actually houses these vertical strawberry farms. And they managed to grow some really nice strawberries over the summer. And I actually tasted one. And it does taste of real strawberries. So this is something that we're going to actually pilot in more detail to see if we can actually implement it at a more affordable scale across the city. One thing that has really brought people and is attracting to this place is the social value and the social engagement that it has amongst residents. So in the whole city, we have a variation of activities. So we have two different types of pool. This is the community pool. We also have different types of running tracks and cycling tracks. So we have a 4-kilometer cycling track loop that goes around the whole city. And one thing that we try to actually do is to use sport as a way to create social engagement. So when I moved into the city, I did my first triathlon. And I remember just from that event, I managed to meet so many new people. I had seen them before in the city, but I've never had the chance to actually meet with them. And I remember the first time, so before I actually moved to the sustainable city, I used to live in London. And I lived in London for 10 years. And I lived in a place called Clapham Common. And I used to go running around this park all the time. And it's a place where you don't expect someone to say to you, good morning. It's just not that kind of place. You know, you do your running, you do your thing. And if someone says good morning, you run faster. You know, that's the kind of place it was. And I remember that the first time I went to the city and I started running, I noticed many people were coming to me and asking me who I was and saying good morning. Then I realized everyone knows everyone here. I realized that there is a scale to a development where when you build at a certain scale, you really create a sense of community. And I think the urban planning has a big role to play in that, to really create social engagement amongst people. So I think the best measure of sustainability is actually knowing how many people know their neighbors. So we're now looking at not just getting data from the buildings in terms of environmental data, but also social data to understand what kind of people live here and who knows who, how many neighbors they actually know. One thing that we've learned is that the many people who actually live here are from European countries. The biggest demographic is British. We have 159 British families that live here, and we asked them, why is it that you come here? So we had an initiative which was called Meet the Community, where we learn more about the residents, and that really gives us good data to then implement in future projects. And one thing was that the main reason was that they come here for the quality of life. They come here because it's a very safe place. They come here because they have so many different activities. And not many places in Dubai have this equestrian track that goes around the whole neighborhood. So we have an equestrian center that actually teaches young people, as well as adults, how to horse ride. And we have a huge equestrian field, and we have a 4-kilometer strip of horse running track. We also have many different types of sports pitches. And we also create events that actually increase social engagement between the different clusters. So we have 5 clusters of villas, and each cluster actually plays in tournaments against another cluster. And we find that's become a really useful tool to get people to know not just who lives in their clusters, but who lives in cluster 5 or cluster 4. But everything is really connected along this green spine. And I think the green spine has become a very useful tool for us to understand that actually the landscape is where you have the biggest value when it comes to urban planning. And the landscape plays such an important role in creating livable places. The waste story is also very important. So we're trying to reduce and actually increase, so we're trying to reduce waste, but also increase the amount of recycled waste. So what we've tried to do and what we've implemented is these 5 waste streams across the whole city. So within every, I would say, 20 to 30 meters, someone has access to these bins. And that's actually created much more recycled content within the city. And we actually analyze that data. So we work with a company called Tadweer, which is a recycling company. So they actually come with they come to the city, and they come to collect all these waste with an electric buggy. And they do this, and then they actually give us the data. So the biggest waste stream that we have at this moment is the cardboard and the paper. So something that the main reason I would say that many people were doubtful that this will never work was the economic viability. So many people who come here and they see this really green city in the middle of a desert, they say it must cost a fortune to live here. The service bill for these people must be enormous. So they say, how much is it? And we say, 0. They say, no, it's not possible. It's just not possible. How can it be 0 service charge? How can it be 0 maintenance fee? And people don't believe it, but it is. It's 0. So they say, who pays for it all? Who pays for all this greenery? And this is part of what makes the next generation of sustainable cities. We need to be disruptive, and we have to think of all the 3 key pillars of sustainability. And the economic is one of the key pillars. And we have to take a balanced approach. So when we talk about economic sustainability, we have to come with new models that's going to bring benefits to people who live here. So one thing that we did on this project, we came up with a new model, which was to actually create a mixed-use area, which would generate revenue that will cover the entire cost of the maintenance fees of the city. So when people move here, they actually become partners in the project. So all the revenue that is generated from the food and retail and the supermarkets, this revenue, the profit from this revenue is what covers all the maintenance fees and the ongoing service fees for the city. So it's a very unique model that doesn't exist in Dubai. This is one of the first cities, first communities to actually come up with this model. So it's very disruptive, but it's also having a very good economic benefits to many people, even the underprivileged. So in the city, we have these 11 biodomes, and in these biodomes, we are growing organic herbs. So we actually not only employ people to actually grow these herbs, we also have a program where we give priority to the residents who live here, even their children. So if you're above a certain age, you have the first priority to get some sort of job within the city, whether it's to help in the urban farms or even work in the retail or in the hotel or in the school. So in these biodomes, the biodomes have a capacity to grow around 1 million of these pots. And what we do with these pots is we actually sell these pots to the supermarket. And that also helps to create another revenue for the city to cover the maintenance fees. But I want to really come back to the landscape. I think this has been the biggest success story of this project. I think in the past, urbanists, we used to talk about how the landscape were the things in the bits, these bits in between buildings. But today we are talking about the buildings being the bits in between the landscape. So I think when we're designing projects, I think this ground-up approach to planning is what's making these communities very successful, because there's so much value in the actual green spaces, and it's the green spaces that are bringing everyone together. So the sustainable city in Dubai has become now a living lab. And I think that idea of creating a community that is constantly flexible and is adapting all the time is really important. So one thing that we've tried to do is analyze many different types of data, both economic, the social, and the environmental, and try to see where we need to make improvements. So many things have been changing within the city. I was speaking with the previous speaker, Paul, earlier on about the concept of sharing and how different culture have a different idea of sharing. One of the things that we tried to do in this project very early on was try to have this bike sharing program. But we then later realized that while certain demographics embraced that culture of sharing, others didn't. So many of the bikes, were either damaged or they were left in different areas. But then that data gave us useful information. And we then made sure that, okay, we focus more on the buggies, which was actually doing very well, and focus more on the walking and focus more on creating more events around cycling. Now, most residents who want to cycle have their own bikes. So I think when we're designing the next generation of cities, and there are many more of these cities that are going to happen in Dubai, we have to think holistically. We have to think, how can we create destinations that are going to create a higher quality of life? And the landscape is a big part of that. And to make sure that we can make them flexible enough so that we can adapt them and change them. So the whole city is aiming to be net zero, and it will be the first net zero project in Dubai. It's going to generate around 10 megawatts. So we have 2 more solar farms to connect. All the residential areas are completely finished. We have almost 100% occupancy. It's around 98%. The only buildings that have left to finish are the hotel and the school. The school will be open in 2 months. And then there's the Innovation Center, which will house our new offices. So I am now living in this city. If there's one thing that I could describe or summarize this project, I would say the journey has been quite thrilling. I think the journey, especially back in 2013, as someone who almost believed it will never happen, and when I tell the same people that actually I'm living there, they think, what? It's already been built? I'm like, yeah, there's people living there. There are people living there, and there are many people who are actually wanting to come and live here. We have a mixed-use area that has apartments. Those are 110% efficient. What that means is there's a waiting list. So we have a waiting list of people who want to actually come to the apartments. Most of the villas are already, there's only like 2 or 3 villas that I think are left to be occupied. But I would say this green spine, by far, is the social glue to this whole project. This green spine is very unique. It has become the place where everyone meets. It's the place where it's actually creating a lot of interaction as well as engagement. My name is Baharash, and thank you for listening.